This is Tell Me Exactly. I'm your host, Meredith Jensen. And joining me today is one of my favorite colleagues. And we go back, man, how far do we go back at this point?
I
Too
think I would
far.
be afraid to venture a guess. So,
I love it. Joining me today is Brian Dale, and I'll let him explain what his title and role is with Priority Dispatch. One of my favorite guests, like I said.
hello everybody. I am currently functioning as a subject matter expert for police, fire, medical, and EDQ. Not police, by the way, in any way, shape, or form. I've been working with the company since 1991 as a contractor and came over full time in 2017.
So, yeah, that I guess points to how long we've known each other. Although, do we really want to talk about what I was doing in 1991 versus what
We
you were doing in
certainly do not,
1991?
because nobody cares,
It
especially
doesn't
me.
go back that far. We'll just leave it at
It was
that.
probably in the early 2000s, wasn't it, that we met?
Yeah, for sure.
Like
I
somewhere in
mean,
there.
somewhere, yeah, to maybe
Somewhere in there.
2010-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, 8 to 10, yeah.
So anyway, today we are talking about the concept of reasonableness and how it applies to quality assurance. One of my favorite topics. I think that before we even get started, I think this is going to be one of my favorite episodes because you obviously are one of the leading experts on this topic and have lots to share with us. So let's get into it. In a nutshell, Brian, how would you describe the concept of reasonableness as it applies in this setting?
Well, I think that for people doing case review, the easiest thing to do is sit down, listen to a section, stop, think about it, look at the standards, look at policies, come back, mark something right or wrong, and then move through. And that's not really reasonable. The dispatcher didn't get to do that. They didn't get to phone a friend, put the pause button. And so when we started in 2017, the EDQ Council of Standards met and started moving from standards 9 to standard 10. And within that, we started talking about how to alleviate some of the, I don't know, for the lack of a better term, draconian case review processes that we were seeing. And I
Sure.
don't think people are trying to be bad. I think that if you don't have a lot of experience in emergency dispatch taking calls, and now you've gone through a EDQ course, then you don't have a lot of experience taking or reviewing those courses or the cases. And so when that's the parameters of the performance that you're doing, then I think people tend to lean towards the simplistic, it doesn't say that in the standards, therefore it's wrong.
Yeah, the black
Um,
and white thinking, right?
yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
not that's not what it says. It says will be read as written, right? And so we
Mm-hmm.
have seen people saying and versus and the Q is marking them wrong, right? That literal interpretation of the standards. And I taught the first Q course in 1997, and even then we taught people how to do it wrong. We taught people
Mm-hmm.
to listen to the case the first time, just get a feel for it, right? Second time you listen to it, you start the review audit process. And the third time you kind of wrap it up. And if you tell that to any emergency dispatcher, then they're going to go, well, how come I didn't get 3 times to get it right? You
Right.
get 3 times to review it, right? So in that process of developing version 10 and the curriculum and the standards, we applied something called, if you will, the standard of reasonableness. We didn't put it in print until version 10.0.1, but
Mm-hmm.
and we'll talk about how we defined it in the standards. Getting ready today, I went into Merriam-Webster's dictionary,
Love
and
it.
it gives some definitions that I thought were pretty reasonable for this. Number one, being in accordance with reason. Number two, not extreme or excessive. And number three, moderate and fair. The concept of
Yeah.
reasonableness also can be described as sensible, rational, and well-grounded, right? So I think I think that's where we are. How can we have the Qs review a case and uphold the minimum standards as identified by the academy, but not be unreasonable or excessive or not be fair.
Right.
And I think the thing that is interesting is that we've always tried to teach the cues that when you're reviewing an incident, you should have to deal with three variables constantly in your head. Those variables are the incident, background noise, people screaming, very quiet, wherever the case is happening, the caller and their emotional state, and their emotional capabilities. And
Mm-hmm.
third, the patient variables, unconscious, excited, seizing, whatever the case may be. Those are the three variables that the dispatcher is always having to deal with. And it's not supposed to be a process where we now have the chance to pick apart the incident based on how we would have done it if we were, taking that call. The other variable I think that created what we are seeing or what we were seeing is that you used to have to be an emergency dispatcher for a year before you could even take the Q course. But we got busy enough and we were growing at such a phenomenal rate, which is a great business,
Yeah.
problem to have,
Right.
that you didn't have to be a dispatcher for a year to take the course because we had so many agencies implementing with nobody having background in this before. And so you could be in an EMD or EFD or PD class this week, and you could be in a Q class next week, having never used the protocols.
Right.
And so that's where it kind of starts. And I've heard people say, well, if we're all going to give credit for this and that, then how do we have any sorts of standardization between the three Qs that work for my agency? Right. So again, there are discussions that are always going around and around. And how I've told people is what you need to be able to do is define the size of the box that dispatcher gets to work within based on incident, caller, and patient variables. And so if that is the case, it brings around the process of looking at looking at every case, and if they do something that's a little off and not clearly wrong, you look at it for that lens of a reasonableness, which means was it clearly wrong? Does it improve caller or scene management? And does it enhance the protocol flow? If
Mm-hmm.
the answer is yes to those things, you could always give feedback. If you think they've gone right up to the line but haven't changed the meaning or intent of a question or instruction, but they kind of went a little farther than you want them to go based on what you have heard, you could always mark it as not as scripted and give that strength-based feedback, right? Or constructive positive feedback. And again, using some of those formulas that we teach in the Q course may help people get there. And if I'm working with Meredith in a center and we're both Qs and I hear something that's weird, I didn't know what to do. I would give
Mm-hmm.
the person credit and I would say, hey, would you review this case for me and tell me what you think? I'm not going to preface it, but I think, you
Right.
just let somebody else listen to it. You have that conversation as part of your quality assurance unit, normal monthly, weekly, bi-monthly meetings where you can come to agreement. The next time we hear this behavior, we're going to handle it this way, right?
Right. And that's the concept of calibration that we talk about in everything that we do in Q and how important it is.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
When you listen to cases, you'll hear dispatchers do things. And one of my favorite Meredith from the Compass event we did in San Jose.
Mm-hmm.
We had an
Mm-hmm.
audio file that we heard that we listened to during this presentation. And the dispatcher, you could tell he must have a pretty black and white cue
Mm-hmm.
for verification purposes. For verification
Right.
purposes. Between case entry and key question one, he said for verification purposes three times, not on the address and phone number. It was
And
on,
what he's really saying is for the purpose of my
yeah,
Q
yeah.
listening, so you
Hey,
don't
Mr. Q, are you
deduct.
hearing this? I
Yeah.
got this. I got this. I got this. And
Yeah.
it's just interesting that you hear that. You also hear dispatchers do things that are not in the protocol, but really, really sound good. There's a
Mm-hmm.
case where a dispatcher is doing CPR for a person who was doing cement work on the curb and fell over and was in cardiac arrest. And the paramedics arrived there fairly quickly. And the dispatcher says, "Sir, you did a really good job. You did 364 compressions. The paramedics will take over. Don't stop until they take over from you, but you did a really good job today."
Yeah.
And it's like enhancing protocol flow, good customer service, right? Those are the things that I want the dispatchers to do. I don't want you to check your brain at the door when you pick up the card set in the morning or turn on ProQA, right? And you and I have both seen dispatchers that are so focused, probably because out of avoidance behavior from a queue that they have had experience with, where they do turn robotic and just read every single thing on the screen, right?
Right.
And I think that's not a good way for us to manage our call intake process. It is such an important aspect of public safety to get as much possible information for our responders as we can and give the caller the best possible information to stabilize the scene, as NFPA 12 and 1060 talks about managing
Hmm.
or mitigating or de-escalating the situation. And if you're having fights with the dispatcher or the caller, that's not going to go so well, right? If they don't trust you, then it's just one of those things where it doesn't go like we know it should. I was talking to somebody, and this was in a fire department executive course, and there was a gentleman in there that said, "Yeah, I just have to turn off my brain when I pick up my card set in the morning." That was a direct quote from him.
Oh, man.
And a dispatcher who I knew was in the room from the same agency said, whatever his name was, "I disagree with you. Instead
Right.
of trying to worry about what to say next, I know what it's gonna show me what to say next. So when I ask the question on the screen, I can just kind of sit back and listen to the caller's response, because it's not always yes, no, unknown. Well, maybe it was yesterday.
Right.
These things that come up." He said, "I can just listen, and then I can make a better pick, or I can clarify using their statement and to clarify that." And I thought that was fairly intuitive for him to say, "I don't have to worry about what to say next. It's going to show me. I can listen to what the caller is saying, pay attention to background noises or other people talking, or whatever the case may be, to make sure I'm moving that call in the right direction."
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, especially when I am teaching Universal Standard 1 for as written, because that's a sticky one that a lot of people get hung up on, right?
True.
And one of the things that you talked about that I really, really like, and I also emphasize during my Q classes, is exactly what you're saying there. We have that analogy in the Q class of baseball batters having batting practice and doing your
Muscle
golf
memory.
swing over and over, muscle memory, right? And that's what we're trying to get across with that slide, is the fact that if we are building those good habits with them of doing it the same way over and over and over again, like you said, their brain can sort of focus on all of the other things that they should be doing instead of thinking about what to say when the script comes up. And so it allows them to divide their attention and be able to active listen and multitask and do all of those other things. So, yeah, I always focus on that as well. Another thing that I wanted to kind of touch on that you started with was, the size of the box. And I like that too, establishing boundaries with the dispatchers, because one of my favorite things to do when I go out to agencies is teach dispatchers about the concepts of queue. And I really wish that every single dispatcher could sit through a Q class, even just to, if they weren't going to be certified to do case review, just to get the background knowledge. Because I think a lot of the dispatchers have the notion that the Q process is intended to look for all of their mistakes instead of what it's really designed for, those standards. Like you mentioned, when we hear something that's a little bit off, our first instinct as a Q should be to go to the standards and find a way to allow for that within the boundaries of what we've got in the standards. And then if we can't find the rule that says that it's wrong, or we can't find the thing that sort of indicates that they should have gone in a different direction, even if it's not the same way that we would have done it if we were on the phone. Like you said, if it's not wrong, it's right. They get credit for it. And so I love doing that. I love when I can, have those conversations with dispatchers and that light bulb moment that goes off when they realize, oh, and sometimes it's a bit disheartening because you have to wonder, how has their queue been doing it at their agency? And is that why they've got all of these sort of myths about the queue process and maybe negative biases towards it? But I love that.
When we teach the Q course, and I couldn't agree more with what you said. Back in my old days, when I was overseeing the Q process for my department, we would actually do some series of things over a quarter. Then the fourth quarter, we'd actually do some case review. And we didn't do it in Aqua or anything. We had the cheat sheet practice scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And what was amazing to me was, as much as people would complain about the hard-nosed queues and out there to get me, when you have a dispatcher go through this introduction to queue and you give them an opportunity to review a case, they're typically more strict than I ever would have been.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
amazing to see how they switch when you put them in a different seat, right?
Right.
And the thing that I've told them is, when you're sitting in the queue seat, you guys are so used to listening to the caller, and that's what you should be doing. But as
Right.
a queue, I'm listening to the caller, but I'm hyper focused on you. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
listening to both sides of that conversation, because both sides drive my review of any element that you're working on, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
takes time to kind of master, not just listening to what the caller is saying, but how the dispatcher is interpreting that, and how
Mm-hmm.
they clarify things, and how the answers to the questions that they insert based on what the caller says, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, nobody's trying to do a bad job. No one.
Of
And I,
course
and
not. Yeah.
and you and I are not saying just do what you want. We'll make it reasonable in some way. There is a boundary to the box. And once you step outside the box, I will mark it as incorrect. And then I will give you positive feedback, or strength-based feedback, on how you can improve that the next time. Not just, you didn't do so well here, or you could do better. I used to say failed. When I first started doing case review, 1996, I was a firefighter paramedic who was used to giving feedback to paramedics or young firefighters, younger
and,
firefighters.
and very much black and white, and you either did it or you didn't. You did it right or you did it wrong. Yeah.
Didn't really care how you told them they did it wrong, because they, in their heart, they knew they were better than you anyway. So it's a different dynamic when you're talking about a field provider versus somebody inside the communication center. And I had dispatchers literally would say, "He's back," when I would walk into the center to start case review in the morning. And that, and at first I thought it was kind of a ha ha, moment. I don't think it
Sure.
was. I think they were letting me know that they weren't looking forward to the tasks that I was going to complete that day. And I
Mm-hmm.
had deserved that, right? For every one positive or every one negative thing, it takes 3 to 5 positive things to counterbalance, right? And some
Right.
days you're going to take whatever you have at the bank, you're going to take it out. And you're going to deplete your reserves, because you're going to have a couple of cases where the dispatcher wasn't, he was outside or she was outside the box. And so when you have an opportunity to make it a teaching moment, and you have an opportunity, even when the dispatcher had some problems in a case, to give them feedback in a way that doesn't make them feel less than. It's reviewing performance, not your person. And here's how you could do better in the future. In the future, when you're faced with an excited caller, whatever the case may be. And so, and the other thing that's reasonable from a dispatcher's perspective, if you're going to write me 2 paragraphs on when I did something wrong, you better be able to write a nice comment when I exceed expectations, not when I meet the standard, right? But if I've done something above the line, I managed a caller, I managed a difficult incident, I managed a critical patient, then there should be as much discussion and feedback to that side of the coin as there is to the opposite side. And I think that's something, again, that we forget. And we both heard this. I've got so many cases to review today. I haven't got,
Yes.
I just didn't have time to stop. I would tell people, if you get one of those cases where it's like, oh my gosh, that was so good, I would rather you do three
Stop what you're
cases less
doing.
today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do 3 cases less if you have to, but get the feedback to that person, right?
Yeah.
Because you would make the time if it was a pretty bad case, or, something had happened. You're like, oh my gosh, they need to hear about this one. But we don't have a habit of letting people know when they did above board. You went much farther than you had to in this case, or for this caller, or for this patient. So when we're looking at that, the dispatcher needs to understand that while we're not looking for every little nicky knack mistake, when something is clearly wrong, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you got the wrong chief complaint, I understand this or that. But in these situations, with this caller said, this was not this, it was, not X, it was Y. And as long as you're consistent in that, I don't think that dispatchers will learn to manage that, I think.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that about also taking the time and making it a priority to recognize when they get it right. Because as you mentioned, both of us have experienced, going into agencies to help support them in whatever capacity and just simply asking the question, okay, what kind of feedback are you giving to those high compliance? And okay, I can clearly see what you're doing with all of the non-compliance, but what are you also doing on the good side? Because I talk a lot in Q class about making sure that you're not setting up a culture that the dispatcher knows as soon as you say, "Hey Brian, I need to talk to you for 5 minutes when you're between calls, come see me in my office."
The
But that
woodshed.
automatically means I'm going into the principal's office and I'm in trouble for something I did wrong. And so, public recognition of those times that they, did it right. And also, another thing that you kind of touched on that I really like is that those things that they did right don't have to be life saves or baby deliveries or anything to that dramatic level. It can simply be that, like you said, they sort of gave that patient more than they were required to give that day. And you hear that coming through in the call
Yep.
and the importance of recognizing that. Yeah.
Right. There was a case I heard from the United Kingdom where a gentleman hung himself, and his wife came back home only about 5 minutes after she left. And so when she was able to get him down or cut him down off the rope, and she gave him a couple of breaths, and he started breathing on his own. And the minute he started breathing, she breaks down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the dispatcher just said, I understand this is very difficult, but I'm going to be here with you until the paramedics arrive. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's
Awesome.
beautiful, man.
Yeah, I love
that.
it. Want to
So, but
hug
that
them.
wasn't
Yeah.
as important to the dispatcher as it was to that patient's wife, right? Just
Right.
the fact that I've got your back, I'm here with you, and she's going through some different things, obviously, because she thought her husband was dying, and now he's coughing and he's breathing. But it's those things that can truly make a call. Just, you listen to the call and it just feels right. It
Yeah.
feels like they went to that edge and they went a couple steps more. So when we're looking at this, you and I know from the years of experience that we both have, but I think for our listeners, it's so imperative to, you don't have to be a cheerleader 24/7, but when you hear
Right.
that case that touches you, there ought to be something in the comments. There's got to be a positive thing that you let them know that how you manage that even touched me, or it was clear to the
Mhm.
caller that you were managing this case with exemplary performance levels. It's those little things that we do that put some credit back in the bank and let the dispatchers know what you do matters.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I really like about our strengths based feedback formulas. On the recognition formula, putting that why and the outcome in there, right? Like the fact that told this caller that I'm staying with you, I'm right here with you, really, had an impact on helping them through this. I mean, and just quick little comments like that, as you mentioned, can be so meaningful. Even for the grumbliest dispatcher, is that a word, grumbliest? Most grumbly dispatcher on the floor that claims that they don't ever want recognition for their performance, you're still gonna, get through a little bit of a crack in their heart when you tell them that was really meaningful to you when you listened, and that it had to have been for the caller.
Right. Since you opened the door, I'm gonna jump on my
Yep.
soapbox just for a second.
Can't
I
wait.
don't think there's a person on the planet that doesn't like or enjoy, in some
Mm-hmm.
perverse way, positive feedback. What they're telling you is, I don't want false praise. Good job on customer
Gotcha.
service. Oh, shut
Yeah.
up. I don't, I would rather you say nothing than say some generic
Yeah.
comment like, oh, that was great on whatever, customer service, or
Mm-hmm.
calming them down. The intent of positive feedback is to get the person to replicate that behavior.
Do it
How do
again,
I
just
how
like
do I
that.
replicate
Mm-hmm.
good behavior for great job on customer service? That's just a
You
late. I'm sorry
can't.
if this is you. You should look at that and what that causes, because it is lazy behavior. I have
Mm-hmm.
to say something, so right.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree with those people. I am uncomfortable getting positive feedback. Um, I understand that I have some talents in certain areas. I don't want, but if I have done something to actually impress you, it never hurts to hear. I may be uncomfortable for me for a few moments, but everyone likes that positive reinforcement with history, with a story. It can be a
Mm-hmm.
quick story, but this is the specific thing that you said or that you did that impacted this incident, or impacted how the caller was responding, or impacted me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as we're looking at this, one of the reasonable behaviors or standard of reasonableness is don't give false praise. If you're going to give
Yeah.
someone praise, give it to them. If you're going to say that it was a compliant case, no further feedback required. And which is what
Right.
I always put. If the protocol did its job, you did your job, the caller did their job. I'm not going to write history on that, right?
Right.
But if you have done something that's fairly significantly wrong, or you have done something that is over the edge as far as how well it went, then that should be a balanced approach to the type and the amount of feedback they get.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the way they can see there's a balance here. There's a scale of reasonableness where if I do it really, really good, they tell me what I did and how that impacted the call. And if I did not so good, that they tell me how that impacted the call and how I can do better next time. That's, I think, one of the core attributes of a standard of reasonableness. They should understand what the process looks like. It shouldn't be a guessing game for them.
Right.
Like if I walked onto the floor to grab somebody or to talk to somebody, it meant one thing. It meant they were going to get congratulated in front of their peers,
Mm-hmm.
somewhat trying to embarrass them just a little bit, right?
Sure. Just,
Just,
like you
good
said,
hearted.
even at their core, they
Oh, yeah.
they seek they need that. They need
Oh, yeah.
that validation
Yeah.
that they're doing it right,
Right.
and that intrinsic motivation that they're going to get whether they admit it or not, right?
Yeah. One of those little things that happened to me early in my Q career, we were trying to get accredited and we were struggling and we weren't moving as fast as I thought we could. And I was at home one night, and this goes how back it was. It was Corel Draw, if you remember Corel Draw. But I made this little fire guy, and it was, hey, burning the compliance, you burned up the compliance on this case, or something to those effect. And their name, their
Total
compliance
cheese.
score, yeah, what they did, right? And I gave it to them at the lineup in the morning, right, in
Mm-hmm.
front of their peers, right? And the first one I ever gave was Lisa Burnett, who retired as a communication director in Salt Lake City, some years later. And it was funny because she got ribbed. Oh, you got a little brown spot on your nose, Lisa, all the
Right.
stuff you would expect. Our compliance jumped 14% in 30 days from those things that I
Yeah.
was giving out, right? And so to those people that say that doesn't work, I call BS, right?
Yeah. It's not a
Um,
fluke when you see
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, when you start looking at how to make a positive environment, and positive management style. It's about coaching, understanding, and expecting the same from you as you expect from your staff, and treating people consistently in the same way. If it's on this side of the ledger sheet or on that side of the ledger sheet, they should know what's going to happen, right? Even
Yeah.
even feedback. I mean, agencies, we give all of our dispatchers every case we review. Hmm. Okay, but how much notation do you make on a compliant case? Why do I want to get back just a stack of papers, right?
Yeah.
So we made the intentional act to give only performance that was exceeding or high standards or exemplary,
Non-compliant, exemplary. Yeah.
or if it was non or low compliance. So that meant
Right.
compliant and partial. We never gave them the feedback form and talked to them. We only
Mm-hmm.
gave them the ones where it was really, you need to read through this and ask me if you have any questions, let's talk. Or I want you to know how much this case impacted me and how you managed it, right? And so when you're looking at that, those are some of those things that kind of wrap up into this ball of reasonableness.
Yeah.
Um, and you have these dispatchers do it, and we actually put some of this into the standards in 10.1. If a caller, you talking to Mr. Smith at 2 o'clock in the morning by himself having chest pain in his living room, well, the doors are probably locked, and the dispatcher says, do you think you can get up when the paramedics arrive? Do you think you can get up and unlock the door without hurting yourself? Right, not in the
Right.
protocol. But
Mm-hmm.
if the doors are locked, we're going to get in, and
Yeah.
that's going to cause potential damage to the house, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the fact that the dispatcher does those kinds of things that are not in the protocol but enhance the protocol flow, those are all positive things. I had a
Reasonable and
dispatcher,
safe. Yeah.
yeah, I had a dispatcher, I don't remember where they were from, but they were talking to a gentleman whose wife had non-diabetic, found her in the bathroom, unconscious, the insulin syringes on the counter, typical thing.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole focus was to get somebody to come watch his kids.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept on coming back to, I need to call my neighbor. I need to call my neighbor.
Yeah.
And the dispatcher said, sir, if you'll give me her phone number, then I will have my partner
Right.
call
Give them a
her.
call.
It's really important you stay with me since your wife is unconscious. And it worked
Mm-hmm.
out perfectly, right?
Yeah.
Those things that they do that not in the protocol, but absolutely manage the scene and the caller in a phenomenal way. And it's not even
Right.
that hard to do, right? But that shows true professionalism, and that's what makes a phenomenal emergency dispatcher.
Those ones that we want to clone and sprinkle around in every agency that we visit, right? So, one last thing that I want to talk about before we close out for today is the concept of reasonableness and how it lends credibility to the process of quality assurance, right? I spend a lot of time talking about how we're not trying to build robots. We're actually looking for, critical thinking, compassionate customer service, problem solving, you know, skilled people, humans that can talk to the other humans on the phone and interact like humans. And so, talk a little bit about how the concepts of reasonableness can then lend to some of that credibility there.
Well, I think, and we've heard it when the dispatcher is not
Mm-hmm.
just being robotic and reading what's on the screen and responding to the caller in some flat, monotone way, but at least has a little bit of compassion in their voice, their
Mm-hmm.
mannerisms. I understand this is hard for you. I'm going to stay with you on the phone. We'll work through this together. It's those small things that make it non-robotic, more personal, and it truly, it's you can tell a professional communicator when you hear one.
Mm-hmm.
They can manage. And when you talk about police callers, they have a tendency to be more agitated. When you
Mm-hmm.
have a cardiac arrest, especially involving a child, those callers have more emotion, which can bring up the emotion in the dispatcher, and the dispatcher is able to manage and understand, but stay focused on the outcome, which is managing the patient, managing the scene, not letting things get worse. Those are the things that make not just protocol work easier, but make managing the caller and the scene less stressful for everyone, for the
Right.
dispatcher, for the caller and and people around them, but also for the paramedics or the law enforcement officers or the firefighters. When they walk in the door, it's not pandemonium and chaos. It's going to be excitable, but it's not as bad as it was when that emergency dispatcher picked up the line and managed it in a professional, compliant way.
Love it. All right. So, takeaways. We talked about if it's not wrong, it's right. That's definitely one of the tenets of the concepts of reasonableness. What else? What are the bullet points that we talked about today?
Well, number one, be reasonable. I mean, for heaven's
Yeah.
sakes, you don't have to enforce every single line of every single thing that you see. Your dispatchers need to be held accountable, but you need to be accountable as well and manage the EDQ process and workflow. If you have two queues that aren't seeing eye to eye, and I have to worry, I'm the dispatcher, I have to worry about who's reviewing my cases today, that's a problem for your system. That's a system risk. Be transparent. Pay attention to the standard of practice. Look at the standard. Let the dispatchers read through what the standards say, right?
Yes. They
And
should have access to the copy of the
all the
standards.
time. I used to ask
It's
them. I
not
used to do a
super
CE.
secret squirrel. Yeah.
No, I used to do a CD just on the standard. This is what happened. Is it right or wrong? Right?
Fantastic. Yep.
The universal standards are not a Bible. It's not black and white. They're, encourage standards 10.1.1. It encourages agencies to manage their bits. Protocol 41 just came out. We wrote 2 or 3 additions to the standards to help queues manage this different approach, so they're not marking things wrong that should not be marked wrong, right? We got rid of the standard about bulleted DLS points have to be read in order.
In order, right? Pets, pills, and porch lights. That's what I call them.
That's
Those
right.
instructions. Who
That's
cares
right.
if you say the pills before the pets, right?
That's right.
Nobody.
So the standards are getting better for the dispatcher and for the system. And the last thing
Love
I
it.
would just say, if you're going to expect people to form in a specific way, train them. Don't expect them to read your damn mind. Do some trainings on per policy 1, 2, 3. This is how we do X. When in doubt, do that, right? You have dispatchers, they're talking to a child. They seem to want to change the text on the fly. That is one of the worst ways to do that. Read it as written, be ready to enhance it later, right, or shortly thereafter. So just when you're looking at this, those would be my bullet points. Stick to it, be reasonable, manage it, teach people what you want them to do, be very transparent, and just, the universal standards are not a Bible. Don't blame us. The academy makes me. That's
Right.
kind of a lazy way out of it. But again, we have to uphold the minimum standards, just like paramedics, just like cops, just like everybody else.
And recognize the ways that they're doing it right and doing it well and going above and beyond, because we know that that increases the number of things that are going well and going right all across the board.
Yep.
Brian, thanks so much for your time today. I always enjoy talking to you, and obviously you have a lot of compassion in this area, a lot of knowledge, a lot of history, a lot of experience. So
This was a fun one.
That's a nice way to say I'm old. Thanks, Meredith. Appreciate that.
Well, in 1991, I
In the
think I
nicest
was
possible
in
way.
8th grade.
No, thank you, Meredith. I know that Q is a sacred thing for you as well. I'm not sure sacred is a
Absolutely.
fair word, but it is a big driver for both of us. We know it makes the system better, and we also can make the system work if not done correctly. So I hope this helps our Qs out there that are listening. Maybe you look at it even 1% different, maybe in some cases more than that, but it does work, and it doesn't hurt the standards. It makes them stronger.
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to let us know what you liked, and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Look for @TellMeExactly to get the latest on all things emergency communications. Tell Me Exactly is a Priority Dispatch Corporation podcast developed by our team of protocol experts and hosted by me, Meredith Jensen, with Cody Ekman as producer, Reading Roberts as sound engineer, Scott Robinson and Jason Barber as executive producers.